Hey friends, Andy Crouch from All About Beer here, taking a moment to thank the kind folks at Eckhart Beer Company for their support. Located in lively Bushwick and Brooklyn, Eckhart prides itself as New York City's lager brewery. Instead of chasing trends, the team focuses on brewing a handful of classic European lager styles, giving each the attention they deserve. Eckhart encourages visitors to aim to practice and preserve the dying art of slowing down and being present. We appreciate Eckhart's support for beer journalism. If your business wants to join Eckhart and the dozens of other companies helping us pay our writers, podcasters, and artists, check out allaboutbeer.com/support. We'd love to have you join the All About Beer community.
Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall, and this week it's a conversation with Jeremy Banas, the author of the recently released Lone Star Beer, a history of two iconic San Antonio breweries. That's coming up in a moment, but first, if you have story ideas or guest suggestions or just want to reach out, you can get me anytime on email at johnhall@allaboutbeer.com. That's JOHNHOLL at allaboutbeer.com. And as you know, and I've been talking about this on the show for a while now, and you often hear Andy at the cold open of the shows, but the way we're able to keep bringing original content to the beer industry and to curious beer drinkers is through your support. We've created an affordable underwriting program that's easy on your budget, helps you get visibility, and is an altruistic way to directly fund writers, photographers, and editors. Please visit allaboutbeer.com/support to learn more. When you're at the website, poke around, read some of the recent articles, go through the archives, and tune into other podcasts like One Iconic Beer with Jeff Allworth, Brewer to Brewer, and the All About Beer podcast that's hosted by Don Tess and M. Souter. You won't be disappointed. And you can also find the links to follow us on social media to keep up with everything else we have going on. We'll get into the show in a moment, but first, here's a word from this episode's sponsors.
Today's brewers need hops that perform consistently, from pilot scale to full production. LupoCore was engineered to meet that challenge, delivering enhanced sensory performance, reliable dosing, and scalable brewing efficiency in an easy-to-use T90 format. Backed by Haas innovation and sensory expertise, LupoCore helps breweries create impactful hop character with confidence and control. Reach out to your Haas Sales Representative or visit lupohops.com for more information.
Here's a story brewers know all too well. You walk into the brewery straight to the tank. You pull a sample to do a forced diacetyl test and you wait for it in silence. Something feels not quite right. You reach into the water bath and bring the flask to your nose, and it's a butter bomb. The logistics start running through your head. Do we hold the tank? We have accounts waiting. How many days until it clears? And then you wake up and remember that you use Berkeley Yeast Fresh Chico. It's got ALDC inside every cell, so diacetyl never forms in the first place. Through primary, through dry hopping and hop creep, diacetyl stays ultra low. So you don't have to add ALDC or wait for diacetyl to clean up. And most importantly, you don't have to wake up in a cold sweat worrying about production nightmares like these. Fresh Chico is now available in dried bricks for as low as $88 at berkeleyyeast.com.
One of the cool perks of this job is I get to read books before they come out. And I was actually asked to blurb Lone Star Beer, a history of two iconic San Antonio breweries by Jeremy Banas after reading it. And here's what I wrote. Beer is soaked into the fabric of American history. They're important and timeless brands that have become a part of communities and can tell a story of a place and a people. The importance of Lone Star Beer extends well beyond Texas, and author Jeremy Banas captures the people, recipes, and essence of this iconic brand in this well-researched book. Banas, as you might know, is a freelance writer who's also the author of previous books, including San Antonio Beer, Alamo City History by the Pint, that he co-authored with Travis Pauling, Pearl, a history of San Antonio's iconic beer, and Celis Beer, born in Belgium, brewed in Texas. Jeremy joins me now via Zoom. Jeremy, thanks for doing this. One of the things I think so many beer drinkers are guilty of this, right? When there's a brand that's been around for so long, or a beer that's just part of the general consciousness, even if you're not in its general vicinity or its general market kind of thing. There's things that you just kind of assume about it, or just kind of things that you believe you know about it. And Lone Star, I had that, that catchy National Beer Texas thing. And I remember, my first time going to Texas after turning 21 and, being out and drinking it and not knowing any better, and it's fine, and you drink it when you're here, and that kind of thing, and you understand that there's history because there's old neons on the wall and things like that. But when books like this come out, uh, your latest book on Lone Star, where you really uncover some misconceptions and you set the record straight, and you write in the beginning of the book, about bringing some clarity to things, and in an age where hazy IPA and clear is not necessarily what people want in beer. We need it in history. What was the biggest misconception that you had about this brand, this brewery, before you even started writing, and how did that correct itself?
Well, first, thanks again for having me on. I appreciate it. I guess the big misconception that I had was, you brought it up a second ago, this idea of the national beer of Texas, that one of the things that makes somebody a Texan is you love the Alamo. You never would have you never would have crossed the line when it was drawn in the sand for the Alamo defenders. It's synonymous with being a Texan, this deal with Lone Star, and that had always been around. I was already aware that it was two different Lone Stars, that the Lone Star we all know now did not go back to the 1800s, but that this current Lone Star, the second one, was just always advertised as the national beer of Texas, that it was always synonymous with being a Texan. And it wasn't. Not really for the first 32, 33 years. And so that corrected itself in interviews with folks and just, good old fashioned hitting the library and research.
So let's go back to the beginning. And what we know as Lone Star now is so far removed from what it was back then. What was it? What was Lone Star when it was first founded?
So when it was first founded, it was incorporated as the Lone Star Brewing Association. The brewery officially opened in 1884. It was started by a few local prominent businessmen and investment money and some managerial guidance by Adolphus Busch. So he had a large ownership stake, but wasn't the only one. He was like a lot of the money behind it. And he obviously had experience with breweries even at that point.
Yeah. That's sort of the interesting thing is, that Adolphus Busch connection to it, and just, all of these legendary brands that he had some kind of piece in. But anyway, I stepped on you.
No, absolutely. Because he had in a odd way, somewhat of an involvement with Pearl, not directly with money or work or owning it or anything like that, but he had an indirect link to Pearl. He started Galveston Brewing around that time as well. He was putting his own personal footprint away from Anheuser-Busch around the country, but specifically a couple of places in Texas. And that was, in this case, firstly, Lone Star Brewing Association. But in the early 1890s, he bought out the rest of the investors and then took over as sole owner and having people, help him run it, but being more heavily involved in it at that time.
Yeah.
And that was when there was an Alamo Brewing Company at that time that was around, and they ended up buying this Alamo Brewing Company. And so some of what Lone Star Brewing Association, which did also go by Lone Star Brewing Company, outside of their own beers, they produce beers under that Alamo Brewing brand as well. But they bought a couple of other smaller ones as well, but continued to brew the brands. But I mean, there was a German lager in there, sure. But there was a Bock, there was a porter, there was a Pilsner, there were all these various styles of beer that, we as Americans only rediscovered with the advent of, the micro brews or the craft beer, whatever we're wanting to call it, and all of that kind of coming back in the 80s. They were doing that then. Very
Yeah.
different from the second Alamo.
Well,
And
I want to talk about that in a second, the second Alamo, but that first one, I mean, this book is great because there's a lot of old historical letters. There's, great letterheads. There's photos. There's drawings and renderings, and like all throughout that sort of track the history visually, which I always enjoy in addition to the words as well, because I think it just makes everything just a little more tangible. But there's a letterhead from the Alamo Brewing Association in here that talks about pale Vienna lager beer. It's like right in the logo. And you mentioned all these other beers as well, these porters. Were you able to find any of these recipes or kind of get an understanding of how they would stack in that time period versus what we might think of them now? Those styles now?
Unfortunately, no, that's a good question. Unfortunately, no, I wasn't able to find reference to specific recipes, not so much ingredients and how it was brewed, but a lot of what it tasted like, other than newspaper clippings and so forth that would talk about how popular they were. But, it's just the openness to the diversity of beer styles, I think, allowed people to go, oh, okay, well, we sort of got, a little used to German lagers coming in, but now we see some of this other stuff. It was just, they were really, really successful.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's not exactly answering the question, but there just wasn't anything specifically talking about, okay, so it tasted authentic to what you might get somewhere else. None of that kind of stuff, or how flavorful it was, or if there was a caramel aspect to it or anything like that.
But the popularity, I think, is important to note, because when we look at so many breweries pre-prohibition and in the 1800s, and the ones that sort of filled that local zeitgeist, I mean, for every one of those, there were, I don't know, I'm just throwing out a fake number here, but like, a dozen, maybe more, that have been completely lost to history and totally forgotten. And so the popularity, I think, very much still like today, it's people know what they like, and they drink what they like, and then it just kind of becomes part of their regular routine. And so even if there's not tasting notes like the two of us might do in an article these days, that popularity, I think, is probably the main reason that you're able to write a book like this. And when was it marketing? Was it flavor? Like, why do you think we still know about the first Lone Star today?
It was quite the fixture in San Antonio. The original brew house building and the adjacent buildings, boiler room, and so forth, all of those are still there. You go down there, and they've done a great job of it's currently the San Antonio Museum of Art and has been since the early 80s. They've done a good job of kind of restoring inside and out some of the all these other buildings, reusing them for other purposes. One of the buildings has a restaurant, an Italian restaurant in there. The courtyard that was there behind the brew house building, in the middle of all the other associated buildings, you get an idea of how the enormity of it and the grandeur, I guess, of all of it then. And it's, it looks like, those kind of old, like an Anheuser-Busch building, the way all the brewery buildings looked back in the day, Tivoli and Denver, Pearl and San Antonio, also in San Antonio, and Schlitz, all of those in the 1800s, those ornate, beautiful buildings and brew houses. And I think that was very unique, because at the time, Pearl, or at the time San Antonio Brewing Association, was not quite on its feet. So they didn't
Right.
have their big iconic building, so this was really the first one of those kind of, you see known regional breweries that we all talk about their legacies over time. That definitely set a footprint. Then you see one brewery brewing several different styles of beer. So I think maybe part of it was novelty. They had advertising for sure, but none of it was what we saw like in the early 1900s and 1940s and 50s, where it's like, oh, America's favorite beer. And everybody's saying it's America's favorite beer, or finest quality. And everybody's doing that. Well, there was none of that. It was, I think you saw the advertising, sure, but I think it was the grandeur of this building and this big, oh my gosh, look at this, and we have it. And then the variety of styles and the fact that by all accounts, they were very good. I think just led people to going, hey, this is my place. This is my beer, despite the fact there being a whole bunch of other smaller ones. And so I think that carries. That's part of the grandeur of San Antonio at that time, and a city that's been around a little over 300 years now.
So I want people to read the book. So I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit, but let's talk about the second Lone Star.
Sure.
Because that's the first, and I want people to read the book and read the story on that. But the second is not the first. It's not even it's not a natural continuation even.
Correct.
So what is it? And how did it come to be, Jeremy?
It is the culmination of one man from Kansas who started a brewery in Sabinas, Mexico, oddly enough, with a chance meeting with Otto Kaler, who was one of the founders of Pearl and later the primary owner. Conditions in Mexico for Americans going down there and starting businesses were favorable. It's almost like there were incentives, so to speak.
Yep.
And he goes down there, starts everything up from scratch. Has some money together, realizes even though there's some other breweries in Mexico, of course, at that time, that there were inconsistencies with the beer due to conditions that the beer is being stored and served in. The way the beer is delivered to other areas, little to no refrigeration, so the beer is going to spoil at some point, right? Things of that nature. And he figures out a way to get refrigerated carts or rail cars for transporting the beer to other parts of Mexico, not too terribly far away from him. He gets to filtrating the water so that he has clean brewing water and has a way to store the beer at the right temperature and serve it. He's hiring local workers and paying them more than double what a wage normally was in that area. So he's endearing himself to a lot of the Mexican government and generals in the area. And that does eventually tie into Pancho Villa at that time in the 1900s. But it's very, very successful. I mean, he grew exponentially. Had another brewery, a second location a little bit a ways from Sabinas, but really always wanted to get back to the United States. But, we had, at the time he's wanting to do it, we had this thing called Prohibition. And so obviously not the right time. When Prohibition ends, he is done with the whole Pancho Villa. And everybody will get to read that fun little story in the book.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Spoiler, he gets kidnapped by Pancho Villa at one point, but Carl Hagelin decides to, even though all that's over, Mexico's still too politically and militarily volatile. He wants to go back, and he'd always had his eye on San Antonio. So he says, I'm just going to close down the brewery here. He kept one of the locations open, but moved the Sabinas location up to San Antonio, including the equipment in that brew house. So it came up on carts all the way up to San Antonio, and he builds a new building that eventually became one of the Lone Star buildings. moved everything in there, and it was Sabina's San Antonio.
Okay.
Well, he's already having to fight with, Pearl over tap handles and retail space and things of that nature already, because even though it was San Antonio Brewing Association at the time, Pearl was still a powerhouse already. And he never did quite figure out how to really get a leg up and compete with them. And you get in about 8 years, so this is about 1938, and things aren't going well. So he takes a bunch of investment money in, and he's not the majority owner, but he's still one of the minority owners and still involved in the brewery. And the new ownership decides to change it to Champion Beer. Let's start over. Champion Brewing Company, Champ Beer. That lasted 10 months, and it was getting even worse financially. And some other guys come in, finagle the expired copyright away from a guy who had bought it but wasn't doing anything with it. Decide that we need to capitalize on this whole Lone Star brewing and this reputation that the original one had. Oh, and also Lone Star is a familiar phrase, referred to Texas already at that point. So this is now 1930, late 1939. By 1940, they've rebranded as Lone Star Brewing Company. And you see the first appearance ever of a beer called Lone Star. And that's what we end up having now.
And I mean, it's such a, I think about like breweries today and some of the hoops that they jump through, or some of the things that that whole story is just bonkers in any term, in any timeline. And it's just
It is.
like, but again, and then it worked, right? And San Antonio like fell for the beer again, right? And embraced it, right?
Oh, absolutely. Within the first year, they were already starting on their first expansion. Well, that never happened when it was Sabina's or Champion. There was no expansion. There was just trying to survive and stay open. They're already expanding within the first year. And, you've got a label that now says Lone Star Brewing Company, Lone Star Beer. And the very first label actually has scenes around the label, the way Lagunitas always did with Hop Stupid. It was a small words going around the square of the label. That was what they did, but it was symbols and little small pictures of different things in Texas's history already that tied the beer into Texas a little bit. But yeah, they started their first expansion within a year. And then by the end of that first decade, by 1950, they had already had 3 or 4 expansions. We're getting very, very popular, but still no National Beer Texas yet.
Okay. So how did that come about?
Well, in the book, I approached discussing the 1970s from the perspective of 2 guys, Jerry Retzloff and Barry Sullivan. Barry Sullivan had worked for Narragansett Brewing in the Northeast, which we're all familiar with them now, been revived. He worked at Falstaff in Texas and then ended up getting hired away to Lone Star. So he had all this experience. And then he had this young kid, Jerry Retzloff, who had gone to business school in San Antonio, but had been working at Lone Star, kind of in the accounting area, and then worked his way into sales. And he was kind of like a regional sales person for Lone Star, and Austin was part of his territory. But he's from San Antonio. Well, he's going up to Austin doing beer sales, and he's going into music venues. And this is when, Willie's getting back in Texas and he's getting popular. And you got Gary P. Nunn and some of these other guys that are later known as Cosmic or Outlaw Country. And they're selling out places. One in particular, Armadillo World Headquarters. And the one thing he noticed about that place specifically is everybody had a Lone Star. All the musicians had Lone Stars in their hands while they're playing. Lone Star was just blowing like crazy. In fact, that place sold so much Lone Star beer that the only place that sold more was the Astrodome in Houston. And this is one small little music venue. And he's
but that's part of that, like that authenticity that can't be replaced, right? I mean, I know you brought up Tivoli earlier, and I know your family's got history with that original brewery as well. But there were, I mean, you think about like before Coors had national distribution, and Cannonball Run, and just like like all of these things that people wanted that they just couldn't get, or to feel like a local. I mean, Fat Tire was a great example of that as well.
100%.
Like back in the day, and I think Yingling still enjoys some of that because it doesn't have full 50 state distribution yet.
Correct.
So like I get it, right? Like people want to feel like a local, and Texas. Speaking as somebody from Jersey, Texas like has that outside personality that we have as well, but that like when you show up, like you want to put on a hat, or you want to buy boots, or you want to like I remember the first time we went to Houston, I was maybe 12, and like I was with my grandmother of all people, and she's like, let's go get you a hat, and I still have it. Like it's there's something about wanting to embrace the culture. And I think if you're in a music venue, if you're a band and you want people to buy your shirts afterwards and your merch and everything, you're going to, drink the beer that they're drinking. Anyway, I stepped on you, but like it's
no, you're fine.
Yeah. But it's one of those, like I get the appeal.
Oh yeah. And that's what,
and they lean so heavily into it. Yeah.
Oh no, and I'm sorry, John, I stepped over you. That's what Jerry Retzloff was trying to capitalize. He saw this, and he's like, I've got an idea. He's like, the musicians are drinking it because what is this beer? Everybody else is drinking it that's watching them, and he's like, I think I can work with this. So he had the crazy idea of trying to tie in the burgeoning outlaw cosmic country scene with Lone Star beer. And it's like, but how do I do that? Traditional marketing. Do we pay some of these musicians and people to, help advertise for us and so forth? And it's like, but he's got a small sales and marketing budget that he's working with. And he's not being given much money. He's being given a little rope to do stuff. But he has this idea of tying the music in to it. And what he wanted to do is he's like, well, don't really have a ton of money here. He's like, let me start off by working with this particular venue, Armadillo World Headquarters. And he worked with Jim Franklin, one of the guys that ran the place and was kind of their resident artist as well. Jim had already been known for doing advertisements for other businesses around town involving artwork that had armadillos in it. So he incorporated, if anybody who's been to a honky tonk or an old bar in Texas, you see these posters with Alamo or with Lone Star Brewing and armadillos in it. He incorporated all of that in, and him and Jerry Retzloff are kicking it in the parking lot one day, and Jerry's like, I keep running into these spring breakers that are calling the long bottles we have long necks, and they're like, yeah, we need to capitalize on that. Let's call them long necks. And that's the first time. I mean, long neck. That's the first time anything. Now everything's a long neck, right? But that started
everything's
with Lone
bigger
Star
in Texas. Yeah,
completely. And you could go into a bar and order. I'll take a couple of long necks. They just handed you a Lone Star. It's the way facial tissue is synonymous with Kleenex. You order Kleenex, you're being given facial tissue. Same thing. You ordered a long neck, you're being given a Lone Star, and it just went from there. So what he had to sell this to Barry Sullivan, which it didn't take much selling. Barry Sullivan had done something similar with Nargissette as well, tying in, just putting up advertisements and so forth of Nargissette at music events. And the beer started selling even more. So he's like, no, you run with it. The guy that owned and ran Lone Star at the time, Harry Jersig, and he's prominent throughout the book as well, said, I don't want to know what's going on, because he didn't approve of the whole long-haired hippie outlaw country and all of the scene in Austin. He's like, but hey, if it brings stuff in, great. If it doesn't work, it's your job.
Sure.
And he loved Jerry Retzloff, but it's like, okay, so let's do this. So they started just basically working a little bit with Armadillo World Headquarters on this. So they kind of low-key advertised with them, but they made sure that Willie and all the artists had free Lone Star to drink, so that they were always seeing up there. I mean, Willie's going on tour, and he made sure that everywhere Willie Nelson went, that he was seen with Lone Star. So they supplied free Lone Star for Willie's tour bus. I mean, it's advertising you can't replicate. And I think it'd be much harder now. But I mean, so much cheaper than massive TV and print and radio campaigns that are going to cost a whole lot more money. It's cheaper giving free beer out, and the advertising just does itself.
Yeah.
And you know, throughout the 70s, and it's just every, cowboy hats, country, outlaw country music, and everybody's got a Lone Star in their hand. And that is where Lone Star being synonymous really with Texas and music and everything. When anybody outside of Texas thinks Lone Star, they're thinking Willie Nelson, cowboys, music, all of that. And that was the 70s. So although they had other campaigns that made them successful, the only image we carry of Lone Star now is that image. And so I chose to tell the story, that period of the 70s with the second Lone Star from the perspective of those two guys, because they were Lone Star in the 70s. They are what we all now still think of.
That's so cool. It really is. Again, don't want to spoil too much of the book because I want people to read it. But
Appreciate it.
who owns Lone Star today?
That would be Pabst Brewing. They've owned the brand since '98. Stroh's had bought Lone Star in '95, and everybody had every intention of keeping this iconic this iconic location going, but very quickly decided to go ahead and shut it down, and they shifted Lone Star production to a Stroh's plant elsewhere in Texas, and it was being brewed there, but they shut down that brewery. Well, Stroh's, the big powerhouse, they had been running into financial trouble, and in comes Pabst, who already owned Pearl. Yeah, went ahead and bought came in and bought the Lone Star brand and several others from Stroh's. And since Pearl was still open at that time, Pearl was brewing Lone Star at the Pearl facility for the next 3 years until '01, when Pabst shut Pearl down as well. So Pabst still owns the Lone Star brand and still has Lone Star produced today. Of course, it's switched from the Miller facility up in Fort Worth, where it had been since Pabst got it. But it's earlier this year, I think it was January or February, everything switched to the Anheuser-Busch facility in Houston. So they now produce all the Lone Star that's anywhere in the country comes out of Houston.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
Are they generally seen as decent stewards of the brand, of the legacy?
From what just looking at the research itself, just looking at the information on a whole, yes. Pabst has had challenges as a brand owner, as a steward of that brand and that legacy, only because they've changed ownership hands numerous times since '98. Okay. So sometimes you might see things fall off a little bit, but they still continue to push Lone Star and its legacy to the point where it was supposed to happen earlier this year, but then from what I understand, it's still going to happen. They're going to kind of bring back some of that 70s iconic Lone Star with the armadillo and more tying into music again, because again, that's the image we're all left with. So yes, I do feel on a personal level overall that Pabst in general, despite the different ownerships, has done a pretty good job, more so than I think other brands they own or other brands other people own, legacy brands that are still brewed.
Okay.
Because everybody knows Lone Star, like you said.
Yeah. You have done a number of San Antonio specific books. You've done this one now, you've done Celis, you've done Pearl, you have the San Antonio beer book that you did with Travis Pauling. What's left to cover in San Antonio these days?
Not much. It's really kind of tapped out, like you said. Had the San Antonio book with Travis. And he's been a good support of the books I've done on my own after that. That covered the San Antonio area, right? And then I did Pearl, and then I did Lone Star. And in the San Antonio book, we discussed all the San Antonio breweries from the early 90s, up to, well, when that book came out in 2015 at least. But there's not one of them that's been around long enough to have a legacy for a whole book. That's not anything against any of them that are
no, of course not.
Wonderful beer, wonderful breweries, wonderful people, and have an image. I mean, I think the closest we could come to is perhaps St. Arnold in Houston or Real Ale in Blanco, who have both been around 30 plus years, but we're not quite there yet. So I may step out and do a book on Shiner here later on. There's not one like the way I do them. There's not one out there like that. There's a coffee table picture book history of Shiner. So I may go and do that, but the next book I will actually be stepping out of Texas for at least one book and covering someone else.
Okay. Well, we'll stay tuned for that. I've been asking folks on the show for a while now what I call the green door question. And the premise is, in the TV show The Good Place, they're in the final season, they introduce a concept of the green door, and the characters can walk through it and be wherever they want, doing whatever they want. So if we had a green door on our plane of existence and this conversation ended and you could walk through it and be in any pub or any brewery anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? Who would you want to be with? And what would you like to be drinking?
That is a phenomenal question. Gosh, I'd have to say, just because of a family connection with Tivoli in Denver, I would love to be in the tap room in Tivoli in the 60s when my family had ownership of it at that time, and just, be sitting there. And I would love to be there with my grandfather, Richard Morrow, drinking his favorite Tivoli beer, High and Brow. It's the personal connection, but it's also tying into the history of these breweries that I love, these legacy breweries like Tivoli. But I couldn't, my grandfather, that was one of his 3 jobs at the time. And I just couldn't see sitting there with anyone else drinking any other beer.
I love that. Well, the book is called Lone Star Beer, A History of 2 Iconic San Antonio Breweries. Jeremy Banas is the author. It's available from the History Press, where fine books are sold. I'm going to encourage everybody to go and buy that and read it. And if they want to find you on the internets and all of your various signings and your musings on the world and your tips for cigar lounges in the greater San Antonio area, where do they do that, Jeremy?
With I still say Twitter and not X, but with X, Reds, all of those, it's at Ruination Press, and same for Instagram, and then Jeremy Banas on Facebook. And that's where I'll have updates on everything related to the book, upcoming signings as well. I've got one tomorrow night down at Alamo Beer as well, tying into their part of the Lone Star history.
Nice. Well, congrats on the book. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for doing this.
Appreciate it. Always a pleasure. Thanks, John.
The book is published by the History Press and available where fine books are sold. Get your copy today. Read it. Make it a part of your beer book collection. And you can tell me what's on your mind beer-wise these days. Drop me a line via email. It's johnholl@allaboutbeer.com. That's JOHNHOLL @allaboutbeer.com. Make sure you join the This Week in Rauch Beer group on Facebook. Follow @TW Rauch Beer on Instagram. Upload your photos. Join the conversation. And you can support us by visiting allaboutbeer.com/support. I hope you'll go to that website. I hope you'll take a look at what we're offering, and I hope you'll sign up. Also, when you're at the website, you can check out new content as well as the archives, and you can find links to follow All About Beer on social media. Before we run, here is a note from this episode's sponsors, and we thank them for their support. We hope you'll give them your business.
Tim Shasha from Berkeley East here. When I was the director of brewing at Cellarmaker, there was a time when I was really wrestling with hop creep and diacetyl. I'd be dumping liters of ALDC into the tank, at knockout, at dry hop, before cooling, just hoping that it would work. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. That's when I reached out to my friends over at Berkeley Yeast. I was like, why don't you just put the ALDC in the yeast? And the next thing I knew, Fresh Chico was born. Just like that, all my hop creep woes were gone, which was really cool. But an even bigger thing I noticed is that when I switched, all my beers were popping more. And that's when I figured out that diacetyl doesn't just mean butter. It was also dulling the brightness and intensity of my hops, masking those flavors even when D was below threshold. For me, Fresh Chico was a life changer. And now that you can get it dry, it's easy to use and competitively priced. It's the full package. Find out more at berkeleyyeast.com.
This episode is sponsored by John I. Haas on their new LupoCore Enhanced T90 hop pellets, engineered for peak sensory performance and ultimate peace of mind. Designed for brewers of all sizes, LupoCore delivers consistent sensory outcomes, reliable brewhouse performance, and scalable application across production volumes. Using Sensory Plus selected hops and Haas's advanced pellet processing technology, LupoCore elevates hop expression while reducing brew process loss, all without requiring brewers to change their process. Contact your Haas Sales Representative or visit lupohops.com to learn more.
If you like smart audio content, a reminder that All About Beer has a separate podcast channel. Just search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. You can listen to shows like Brewer to Brewer, the All About Beer podcast with M. Sutter and Don Tess, and One Iconic Beer with Jeff Allworth. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday. The BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. And as for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo. I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.